Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Adele Johnson, Executive Director of the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia, where our mission is to preserve stories that inspire. So we tell the untold stories, the undertold stories, the forgotten stories about African Americans, struggles, triumphs, and contributions, many contributions of our ancestors. And we also love to highlight and celebrate the heroes and sheroes of today. The Black History Museum reopened a few weeks ago, and all is well. We have our COVID-19 protocols in place, and everyone is following the guidelines as requested. We are limiting group sizes, so it's comfortable for you to come and visit, to have a leisurely visit while also social distancing. Our permanent exhibition covers emancipation, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, desegregation, massive resistance, and civil rights. And our featured exhibition is Paradox of Liberty, Slavery at Jefferson's Monticello, which has been extended until November. This exhibition focuses on the 607 enslaved children, women, and men that Thomas Jefferson owned during his lifetime. It gives voice to the enslaved people who honestly we heard very little about until recent years. Yet they were the ones that built and maintained Monticello. So come visit, read their stories, learn about their lives through the more than 300 artifacts. See the photographs. Hear the oral histories that are told by their descendants. We are honored to have this exhibition and to share it with you because it offers a more complete and inclusive history, not only of Virginia, but of America. And that's what the Black History Museum is all about. Voices of Change is the program that you'll see today. It is an effort to continue something that we do at the museum, or we did at the museum prior to COVID, which is hold community conversations with the overarching goal of being a catalyst for dialogue and a catalyst for action. We encourage each of you to take time to reflect on who you are, what you stand for, and what you individually as well as collectively can do to positively impact the future. In a few minutes, you'll hear from several people sharing their personal experiences and perspectives. As you listen to them talking about social action, I want you to think about children. Your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, your great-great-great-grandchildren, nieces, nephews, your neighbors' children, and ask yourself a question. Ask yourself, what kind of ancestor will I be? Will the next generation or future generations say that you worked hard to make the world better? Will they be proud of you? Or will they wonder, why didn't you do something? So, in previous segments, we have talked about protests, we've listened to socially active youth, we've shared experiences related to social injustices. Then we asked whether people are intentionally giving subliminal consent when they see a racially motivated sign or symbol, but they don't say anything. So today we're asking the question, what's next? I don't know the answer, but as I say every time, we can't tell you what to do, but I believe that each of us has a role and responsibility. You have to start where you are and do what you can. Social justice doesn't just happen. We have to make it happen. During the program today, we also want to hear from you. So we will pose questions on the screen, then your combined responses will be shown as a percentage. Please participate because we want to know what you're thinking too. Again, today's theme is, what's next? So let's begin.
Black families have the highest level of food insecurity of any population group in the United States. 1 in 5 Black families live in households that are food insecure, as compared to 1 in 10 white families.
Almost 4 in 10 Black children are in a household that is in poverty, which is twice the rate that is faced by other racial groups.
Black families in America live in substandard housing conditions at almost twice the rate, actually more than twice the rate, of white families in this country.
Among prime-age Black men, 1 in 5 are not in the labor force, which is twice the non-employment rate for other groups.
Although Blacks and whites use marijuana at approximately the same rate, Blacks are over 3.5 times more likely to get arrested.
For every dollar that's earned by a white worker, 74 cents is earned by a Black worker. The levels of debt that Black college graduates have, it is twice the level of college debt for whites.
The likelihood of an African American woman being incarcerated in the United States over her lifetime is 1 in 18. That's as compared to the likelihood of white women being incarcerated, which is 1 in 111. Over the course of a lifetime, a Black man has a 1 in 3 chance of incarceration, as compared to white men who have a 1 in 17 chance.
For a Black child born into the bottom 20% of the income distribution, about half of them, 50%, will still be there as adults.
We are not saying that other disparities suffered by other groups are unimportant. Indeed, we think it is very important that we pay attention to the disparities that every vulnerable group suffers. However, at this time in our history in America, it is most important that we do not lose sight of the very specific disparities and inequities suffered by African Americans historically and currently in the United States of America.
Being a Black man myself and being in the media, I am very plugged in and tuned in to the surface level conversation, right, about what is happening and what isn't happening. But I'm also very in tune with the context of what it took to get to this point, to where we see this civil unrest playing out in the streets in Richmond and across the country since the death of George Floyd. I feel passionate about every single aspect of social justice, from education to public safety, housing, racial equity, voting rights, healthcare, you name it. In terms of education, I firmly believe that education is one thing in this country that can literally change the trajectory of any young person. I think it's unfair for a child to be born in the inner city or in an impoverished community as a whole, and that ultimately, in some cases, can determine how far they can go in life. And I find that to be very problematic, because when you think about where someone is born into, they're born into an impoverished area, you know that there's a history of redlining and other systems that were put in place to then curb Black wealth and the pursuit of Black wealth. So for me, education, I think, is the key. So when we look at our schools here locally in the metro, in the area, you can't talk about the issues that these kids face, and you can't talk about the issues in the education system if you're not actively doing something about it. It is evident that our kids need us, they need our mentorship, they need our guidance, but also from a fundamental level as far as success, schools need to be funded. I came from Illinois before coming here to Virginia, and in Illinois they had issues with funding schools there, and that's an issue that also plays out here in Virginia as well. Housing, as I mentioned before, that in itself, redlining and what systems were put in place to make it difficult for African Americans to seek wealth through home ownership and allowing that to be a springboard for generational wealth. I see issues with racial equity. A lot of the spaces that I find myself in now as an adult aren't very diverse, you know, for various reasons. But even in the field, in my profession, Richmond is very lucky, I would say, in that there are several African American men and women on television holding positions of leadership, being on the front lines, covering the news here in RVA, but that's not the case all across the country. And right now, the hot button topic certainly is police brutality. You know, we see that playing out. We see the country grappling with this and not really knowing in which direction to go and really trying to figure out where or how this is really done. It is interesting to watch this all play out and be a part of history in this moment, but it's also heartbreaking in that this is not something that is new. This is not a phenomenon that just so happened overnight. George Floyd's death was not the only one. We have watched them play out. I think, I don't remember who said it specifically, but these things have been happening for years. It's just being caught on video. So I am hopeful, though, because I see there are some police departments across the country who are actively having these conversations, and some are taking more steps than others. But just like anything in this country, it takes time.
In my current role and my current status, working from my home office since March, I am challenged to look ahead and challenged to consider and contemplate, where do we go from here without being in reactive mode? However, I believe that this season that we are in teacher preparation and around our country at the unprecedented times as relates to race relations, as relates to the global pandemic, calls for new courage and commitment. In order for us to move forward in teacher education, our stakeholders surrounding teacher preparation must demonstrate courage to acknowledge that we all share responsibility in preparing our state's future teachers. This transformation cannot be accomplished by teacher preparation alone, as I've highlighted. Preparation programs, school division teachers, and their representatives and state and federal policymakers need to commit to a common goal of preparing effective teachers for improving student achievement. And without that commitment, there will be no success for our students, our K-12 children, students. Only with deeply engaged collaborations between our stakeholders will our clinical experience be the innovative change agent for that reform, for the improvement, for the advancement of our profession.
I was one of the students in my community that decided I wanted to be a part of the integration of the high school. I told my parents that I wanted to help integrate the high school. I'm not sure what was the catalyst for that decision, but my parents said, okay, so I did. I'm not sure what I was expecting. I'm not sure if I was prepared for what happened. Trying to find the words to explain or to describe that experience, I guess I would say culture shock, disappointing, hurtful, harmful, traumatic. I remember the name calling, the personal attacks, the isolation, not belonging to any after school or social activities in the school, for two reasons. Partly because of transportation. I lived quite a distance from the school, and also probably some safety considerations that my parents had of having to ride the bus from such a long ways or rely on somebody to get me home, or just the nature of the community dynamics at the time. But anyway, I was able to attend high school in that environment, and remember not receiving a lot of support along the way in the school setting, and having to navigate my way through the courses and the subjects and the lunchroom and all those dynamics But what I remember most is the lack of adult protection from the teachers.
Always wanted to make a difference here in the city of Richmond. Becoming the sheriff has given me that opportunity to make sure that people that look like me, people that come from the places that I come from, can be able to move forward in life. How do we do that? We give people the opportunity to become better. We make sure that we put the successes around them so that they can reach them. We here at the Richmond City Sheriff's Office make sure that we can do that for individuals. We have vocational programs, educational programs. We have different programs here for individuals to grow, whether it's being a parent or whether it's just being an individual. We want to make sure that in order to go out in life and do the things that you need to do, we have to have you home ready, work ready, and community ready. But how do we do that? And how does social justice come into that? People feel that they've been mistreated and they've been misjudged. And it's our opportunity here, while they're here, to make sure that they know that we care and that we're doing things for them. We're trying to make sure that they're prepared to go out into this world, whether it's unjust or whether it's injustices. We want to make sure that they have the opportunity, that they have the toolbox that they need to be successful. Now we look at the civil unrest and the social injustices that are going on right here in our city, and we try to figure out, how do we fix those things? We have to sit down and have those conversations. We have to have true and honest conversations about our history as well as our future. Where we are now is a time of everybody wanting to know and everybody wanting to solve the problem. But if we don't sit down together and solve the problem, we're never going to know how to get to the solution. Let's make sure that we reach across the table, let's reach under the table, and put our hands together and put our heads together to make sure that our thoughts are all for one. We have to make sure that people are treated fairly. We have to make sure that policies are written for everyone, not just some. We have to make sure that all voices are heard. We have to make sure that everyone has something to say and that everyone is listening to what that is said. How do we solve injustice? We make sure that we fight for laws. We make sure that we go out and vote. We make sure that we put ourselves in a position to do better. I myself am in this position now, and I've promised that those people that look like me, those people that come from where I come from, that have gone through some of the journeys that I go through or have gone through, that we're in a position to do things for other people. If we don't do it, how can we expect anyone else to do it for us? I'm in a position now that I can give people opportunities, that I can help people to build, that I can help people to get confident in themselves. How do you grow? How do you help people with self-esteem? It's our responsibility to do that, but it's also their responsibility. Everyone has to take responsibility for themselves, but it's our responsibility to reach out and help the next person.
I had an experience once in my life where I was on a plane going to a protest march, and believe it or not, I experienced terrible anti-Semitism on a plane where people said that dirty Jews should be sent back to the ovens. And I stood up against this guy, and at the end of the flight, I said, let's meet outside and we can talk about the 75 members of my family who were killed in the Holocaust. And he ran off the plane and didn't dare approach me. So I understand racism. I understand it from many different angles and believe that we have to stand up against it.
Growing up as a Black person, but also as a non-binary person, a gender non-conforming person, I have, of course, received pushback of being Black in America, but also I've had a lot of issues within the Black community or within the Black and brown community of being LGBT or non-binary or gender non-conforming. It is difficult to fight for the validity or the justice of a group you belong to, when within that same group you're also being ostracized or kind of stigmatized for another part of your identity. And I fight against the understandings of like masculinity and femininity and what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, as neither of those things. I want to break down that stigma that you find in the Black community so that it's not as difficult to fight all together for racial justice or for racial equity.
I think people choose not to vote because they've become disenchanted with the process. They feel like their voice is just not being heard, and that the people they send to represent them are not looking out for their best interest. To them, I say, you need to have conversations. You need to follow up with your elected officials. You need to ensure that your voice is being heard by those you put in office. Voting is but one part of the process. We need to follow up to ensure that changes do take place. I have been Social Action Chair for the Henrico County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta. There, I was able to register several hundred people to vote. We've gone into various communities and held voter registration drives. We've even registered people to vote at the 2nd Street Festival. We've taken voter registration to a whole nother level. We actually went into the communities on election day to take people to the polls. We knocked on many doors and getting people out of their homes to the polls to vote. There was a time when I met a young man. I was trying to get him to the polls to vote, and he said, "I can't vote. I'm a convicted felon." Well, one of my sorors, she was able to talk to him and tell her story about how she got her rights restored. And so right then and there on the spot, I was able to take an application to get his rights restored. He was really excited about it because he didn't think he'd ever be able to have the opportunity to vote. He wasn't able to vote in that election, but he did let me know later that he received his voter registration card, and he was really excited to cast his vote for the very first time.
I feel very passionate about everybody, every citizen having the opportunity and the resources to vote, to cast a ballot in every election, local, state, and national. Outside of the system, there's so many ways that we can make our voices heard. We can protest, we can demonstrate, we can write our elected officials, we can hold sit-ins. But from within the system, voting is the primary way that we can effect change. Like I said, we can demonstrate and protest, but unless there are elected officials within office and elected officials who hold power to craft laws and policies, our demands or the people's demands will never make it into laws and policies. And so voting is so important that we elect people to office who are willing and able to act on our demands and whose values and ideas reflect those of the citizens who they've been tasked to represent. I think now more than ever, voting is just so important. Every day there's a new news story that comes out about how elected officials are working to disenfranchise people from voting, whether it is trying to remove people from the polls, from discouraging people to cast write-in ballots. It's just rampant. And we need to make sure that citizens, everybody, understands the power of their vote and the importance of their vote.
I've lived most of my adult life here in Richmond, having moved to this community in 1970 from Michigan. And over these decades, I've been very fortunate to be involved with several organizations in a meaningful way that have worked hard to deal with racism in our community. It's only been in recent years, however, that I have been waking up to what it means to be white in America. As a mindfulness teacher, I'm using the phrase waking up in a particular way. Much of the time, most of us are busy attending to what we need to do that's right there every day to make sure that we're okay. In mindfulness, waking up means something a little different. It means seeing clearly the realities that are right in front of us. I also now realize that being racially neutral is not enough to offset the effects of 400 years of systemic racism.
I hope that we can be the generation that transitions empathic corporate and government listening into empathic corporate and government financial action that really focuses on and prioritizes individuals and families before private corporate interests. I hope we realize that it is impossible for our society to be socially just without also marrying that to kind of fiscal justice to support the initiatives we claim to care about. I hope that the private sector and nonprofit space is not looked at as the only solution for a lot of the social justice and economic justice and environmental justice issues that my generation cares so much about.
It's been too long, right? It's been a very long time. If John Lewis can cross that bridge in Selma, in Alabama, and die years later, and there are still issues surrounding voting rights, I think that's problematic. But we also honor him for the life that he lived and gave to the idea of voting all across the country, no matter your race, creed, or color. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we can go up, but I also feel that we cannot lose this momentum. As African American people, it is important that we capitalize on this moment in every facet possible. So when it comes to voting in the midst of a pandemic, we have to increase our voter turnout. We have to participate, part of the process. You may not like the outcome, but you have to participate in the process. You can't complain if you don't participate. And that doesn't matter, and that you can vote for whoever you vote for. Participate. I don't care who you vote for, but participate in the election process.
I remain optimistic amidst the global pandemic and racial unrest. Now more than ever, I have seen faculty, division partners, state legislators working together to find a new path, not built from traditions, but a place of innovation.
So I just think what I'd like to share, that it's important that we ask questions. It's important that you take risks. It's important to acknowledge what you don't know. But most important, to press on and just to not be dismayed, even when you're frightened, even when you're fearful. I think it's really important to know that education is supposed to be the leveling field, but sometimes it's unequal leveling field, and you just have to find your niche and press on. So if there's anything that I have to say about what's going on now, it's that we must press on, that we must ask ourselves what's the lesson that we need to learn, and to keep pushing and to share the journey with others, and just to reach out and take somebody along. And I just think that's crucial.
I've chosen explicitly to spend the rest of my time here being anti-racist. I've begun that effort by putting together a mindfulness-based program titled An Exploration of Waking Up to Racism. And in that program, we explore what it means to be white, what it means to be a member of a race. We explore the ways in which, however unintentionally, we are in fact racist. Another part of being anti-racist is financially supporting